everyone. I think we're gonna start. If we have stragglers, they'll just join. That'll be great. Okay, where's the? Okay.
No, we just yell at Mark.
Okay. Could you go to the next slide? A little bit about us.
Hi, I'm Sabina. I'm from the class of 2020. I do some code here. In previous years, I've done electrical, CAD, and a little bit of pneumatics. And I also really love wine.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Annie. I'm going to be senior, so I'm part of the 971's class of 2019. And I do CAD, and I'm also part of Outreach and Awards, and I love penguins. So. Okay, here is an overview of all the sub-assemblies that are in the robot. This is going to be a really informal presentation, so if you have questions at any time, just interject. We also have a robot here, so if you wanted to come up and look at stuff, please wait till the end of the presentation. We are recording a video, so it's nice if there's not a lot of people in the way. But yeah, so these are all our sub-assemblies. Next. Okay, the first thing we have is our drivetrain. In our Ether Robot Drive, we have a 6-wheel drivetrain, and we used 5-inch Coulson wheels. So these are the little rubber gray wheels, and they have a lot of traction. And the reason we use the 5-inch wheels is because we wanted to get up on the platform, and the 4-inch wheels make it fit. And then we also have a clamshell frame, which is a bent sheet metal frame, and it's kind of in the shape of a C, which is why it's called a clamshell. And I'll go over that in the next slide. And then we also have a ball shifter transmission, which allows us to shift between 2 different gear ratios. Okay, here's an overview of our drivetrain. This is what I was talking about with the clamshell frame. The sheet metal is bent. It's one piece of sheet metal, and then it's bent in 2 different places, so right here and right here, and then it forms like a little C shape, and you can put that over your wheels. Yeah. Okay, so then on our drivetrain, we have 6 wheels, so we have belts going from the center wheel to the front wheel, and then belts going from the center wheel to the back wheel. And then to tension those belts, we use these little tensioners, so these are bolted to the side of the drivetrain, right there. And then you have a little nylon spacer inside, and then this is attached to the wheel. So then you're able to move this back and forth, so you can adjust the tension of the belt. You can make it tighter or looser. Yeah. Any questions about that? Let me know if I'm going too fast. Yeah. Okay, so we have our drivetrain wheel shafts right here. We use dead axle, so the difference between, there's 2 different types of shafts that you can use. You can have dead axle or live axle. The difference between the 2 is live axle is directly driving the wheel that it's on. So normally in FRC you do this with a hex. So you would have a hex shaft, and then this would be directly driving a wheel with the hex cut out. But then with dead axle, you have, in this case, it's 2 pulleys that are glued onto a round shaft. And then the shaft itself is being driven instead of the wheels. So then the wheels have bearings on them. So it's slightly different in the way that it's driven. Did that make sense? Does anyone have any questions? So then our ball shifter transmission, what a ball shifter transmission is that it allows you to shift between 2 different gear ratios. So in our case, we have low gear and high gear. And then the advantage of this is that it allows us to push in low gear, so go at a lower speed, and then also speed across the field for quick cycles in high gear. And those are our 2 gear ratios. So there's 2 different types of shifting transmissions that you can do. You have ball shifters, and you also have dog shifters. So the difference between the 2 is in how it shifts. So with dog shifter gears, it has these cutouts, but you can only shift when your robot is moving because the shaft has to fit inside these slots. But then with the ball shifter transmission, the shifting shaft has these 3 extrusions that fit into these holes, and then this allows you to shift whenever you want. And we use 3 mini sims on our robot this year as opposed to 2 regular sims, and she's going to talk about why. Or am I? Okay, so the 3 mini sims draw less current. So this basically allows you to have a really heavy robot because this year our robot was at 119.6 at champs. So that's a really heavy robot. And so then the advantage of using mini sims versus regular sims is that they draw less. And they weigh less.
Alrighty, so for the extras going on, we have a couple of sensors on our drivetrain. We have some normal incremental rotary encoders, one on each side of the drivetrain on the transmission. We have a gyro on the Spartan board, which is the addition we put on the Robo Rio that we sell through WCP, or WCP cells that we designed. And then we have an IMU in the center of our robot. If you look at the robot later on, there's a nice green square, little gray square, and that's what the IMU is. It's an inertial measurement unit, so it has a whole bunch of goodies and around 8 axes, I guess, to navigate with. And then we have a potentiometer, which is on a rack and pinion, and that's actually for sensing shifting. We used to use Halifax sensors, but this year we tried something new. So what is it? We use the space controller for our drivetrain, and we also use sensor fusion, so that's using both the gyro from the Spartan board, the IMU from the middle of the robot, and then the coders on the transmissions. What's space? If you have a question about that, I can answer it later. It's kind of a little longer for the presentation. It essentially just means that we use sensors to know where it is in space, including when it's turned or when you're pushing against it. So that way, if, say, we're moving and you can see it in autonomous, if we're moving and someone pushes us, we'll try and compensate and push harder back to get where we want to go, where our goal is.
Okay, cool. Next one is the arm. Can't really miss it. Here's the CAD assembly. So there's 3 main components. Well, 4, I guess. There's the arm gearbox at the bottom. There's the arm tube. So there's 2 sets of arm tubes, and I'll get to that a little bit later. There's the claw, and then there's also a hanger on the arm. Okay. So probably the biggest aspect of it is the double jointed arm. What we do, we call it proximal versus distal length. So if you hold out your arm, the proximal would be here, so it's closer to your shoulder, and then the distal is the one that's farther away. So then the proximal, it's double jointed because the 2 joints are driven independently. The proximal is driven at the base by a chain and a sprocket, while the distal is driven by cable. And the arms are made out of carbon fiber, so that makes them really light. The whole arm, aside from just this right here, only weighs 10 pounds, which is not a lot. And then this is actually an example of what we were originally intending to do with aluminum tubes, so you can see kind of the difference. This one is obviously a lot cleaner and also a lot lighter than just if we had done it with aluminum tubes. And also there's a lot less parts. So with this one there would have been multiple tubes and gussets that we would have to cut out, and this just simplified our process by a lot. Any questions? Okay, so to drive these we had joints on every section of the arm. So you have the base one right here, and this is attached to the sprocket at the bottom that drives the arm at the proximal length of the arm. And then the sprocket is bolted on this side. And then those 2 are both at the top. So then this one is driving the distal length, and then that one fits right in here too, and then they spin on each other. These are really cool and fancy. We used a 3-axis CNC to manufacture these. And then I talked about how the distal length is driven by cable. So then to tension those, we use those capstans at the top, and then that is the tensioner right here. So the cable goes around the capstan and actually into it. So you can see in the bottom there's a little space for the cables to go into. And then the little round things at the top are kind of like what's on the end of your shoelace. Aglets. They're called aglets. And then they're basically little metal inserts that you can put the cable through, and then you can tighten it, and then it's not going to fall out. So then basically you're able to tighten or loosen those bolts, and then the cable would either get looser or tighter, depending on what direction you're going. Okay, the arm gearbox. This is probably one of the most exciting parts of the robot. It's a 3-in-1, so you get 3 gearboxes for one. The whole thing actually weighs 40 pounds, which is a lot. And it has 5 motors in it. So you have 1 sim for the distal arm, it's in the top corner, it's like right here. And then you have 2 sims for the proximal length. And the proximal length is driven by chain, and those are right down here. Oh, they're right down there. Yeah. And then you actually have a little hanger gearbox tucked in the very back, and that's right here. So it's in the back, and that's driven by 2 775 And then on the arm, we also have a disc brake because the arm is very long and it's controlled by code, but we want to make sure that nothing goes wrong, because if it is uncontrollable, it can actually hurt someone because of how much power it has.
Yeah. And also, if your robot turns off, there's nothing stopping it from the arm just falling down if it's fully up. So we have a disc brake that stops the proximal, not the distal, but the distal tends to be lighter, so it doesn't really fling around right now.
Yeah, so the way that the disc brake works is that it's a pneumatic piston, and then on the end of the pneumatic piston is this little material. I don't know what it's called. It's like rough, so that when it is against the proximal link isn't going to move. Does that make sense?
So when it's disabled, e-stopped, or off, it doesn't.
Okay, so then I talked about how there's also a hanger on the arm. So then originally we actually had the hanger and the hanger gearbox as a separate part, so kind of hanging out on the arm. But then we managed to work the hanger gearbox into the arm, which was a really long process with like all the packaging, because it's actually just in the very back of the arm gearbox. And then the hanger originally used to be a separate mechanism on the arm, and then there used to be two sets of pistons, one set that put the hanger onto the bar, and then another set that deployed the hook that's on the end of the hanger. But then we actually figured out that we can use the motion of the arm to set the hook on the hanger. So then how it works is this is a 3D printed body, and it's clamped to the top of the distal line. And then the hook is held in by that latch right there, and there's a little, we call it a nose picker piston, but it's the smallest piston that you can buy on McMaster, and it has a latch that holds that in for most of the match. So when the arm is swinging around, the hanger hook isn't going to fall out. And then at the front, the little polycarbonate piece, that keeps the hanger hook on the bar when the arm is hanging. Because if you put the hook on and it's not exactly centered, you don't want your robot to be able to fall off that bar, because that would be really sad. So then there's surgical tubing holding down that the little piece so that it is in that position for most of the time. But then when you're putting the hook on the bar, it actually opens it along the slot and it sets the hook onto the bar, and then that stops it from being able to fall out or move. If that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so the fourth part of the arm is the claw, and then the claw opens and closes to hold the cube. So we actually have not really a handoff, but it's two separate assemblies to intake the cube and then to bring it up to the scale. So then the claw is what grabs the cube once it's intaked into the robot, and it puts it onto the scale. So if you go on. So in the beginning we were prototyping the claw because we didn't really know what kind of material would hold the cube well. We wanted to make sure that if you're flinging the cube from the bottom and then you're bringing the arm up to the very top, we wanted to make sure that the cube wasn't going to fall out of our claw. So we did a little bit of prototyping. To prototype, we cut wood on the router. So we have a CNC router in the other room. Does everyone know what that is? I'll just explain it in like 2 seconds. Basically, it's kind of like a drill, but there's something on the end called an end mill, and this allows it to move horizontally, so it's able to cut wood and metal in a shape. Yeah. So this was what we did when we were prototyping the claw, finding out what works, what kind of materials hold it down well. I think students were like taking this and then flinging it around to make sure that it wasn't falling off. So yeah. Okay, so the claw itself is a 3D printed body. So this right here is a 3D printed body. And then there's pistons actually driving the pulleys that are in there, and those pistons are hidden in the distal arm. So to put the claw onto the robot, you actually feed the pistons into the distal arm and then bolt it on the end of the distal arm. And then inside the body is a series of pulleys and these metal strings that open and close the claw.
Alrighty, so just a quick overview of all of the other great stuff that goes on besides mechanical. For code, we actually have, for our arm, it's pretty cool. We use a set of nodes so it's points in space where we want the end of our arm to be, where the claw is, and then we set paths from each point, which you call nodes. And from there, we take that path to one node to the other, and we actually use cost analysis. So if you want to get from one side of from the back of the robot to the front, it'll find a way that which you hit the least amount of points possible while still getting your return goal. For sensors on the arm gearbox, we have absolute coders and potentiometers on both linkages, and we run and then for the claw, we run a disc beam break so we know whether or not there's actually a box in our claw, because it'll stay closed. For pneumatics, we have 2 air tanks actually inside the proximal link. That's why you can't really see them on the robot at all, because they're hidden. And we run the disc brake, of course, on the arm gearbox. So in code we have a box that's not allowed to cross, which is the frame perimeter. So we just run, I think we start using console first, so we'll push that back as far as possible, and then we'll move the distance wherever it needs to go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay, so intakes. I mentioned before we have kind of a handoff where we have a set of intakes to intake the cube into the robot, and then we have a claw to grab the cube and put that onto the scale or the switch. So in terms of intakes, this is the intake on the robot. It's mounted in the front. We have two intakes, or two parts to the intake. We have something where we call the intake pivot gearbox, and then we also have what we call the series elastic gearbox, which is what runs the rollers that intake the cube, or the wheels that intake the cube into the robot. So right here, this in the front, that's the series elastic gearbox, or the wheels that intake the
so there's three parts. There's the rollers themselves, and those run, and then there's also the series elastic, which does the deflection. And then there's the pivot gearbox, which is doing the angle movement.
Right, yeah. Okay. So when we were doing the intake, the most important thing for us was to be able to intake the cube in every position possible. So when it's diagonal, how are we going to intake it so that it's not going to get stuck in the robot? So we use wood that we cut on our CNC router, and we basically changed the position of all the wheels. We changed the wheel sizes. We changed where the wheels were going to be. I think we changed how many wheels we have. So we wanted to figure out the best configuration to be able to get the cube into the robot without it getting stuck right here. So you wanted to be able to intake the cube in the diagonal position and not have the cube get stuck in the robot. So eventually we found out that it doesn't just take the intake being straight on. You have to have some kind of deflection or opening to be able to allow the cube to pass from the diagonal position into the straight on position. Because at the end, your cube has to be straight for the claw to pick it up. Yeah. Okay, so as Sabina mentioned, the first part is the intake pivot gearbox. And this is a really standard gearbox. It allows the intake to fold into the robot the other way. So actually, if you look at it in the position down here, it's in the folded position. So the intakes are able to fold backwards into the robot to be able to stow during the front of the match, and also when we do stuff like hang or lift or deploy the lift. We'll talk about later. And then, okay, this one's a fun one. So there we have the series elastic gearbox, which is this section on the intake. And the general principle behind the series elastic is that you want the cube to be able to, you want the intakes to be able to open slightly to let the diagonal cubes come in. But you don't really know if it's full diagonal or if it's halfway diagonal, or there's a bunch of positions that it could be in when it's being intaked. So what we did was there's a spring right here, and then part of the spring, one side of the spring is attached to the series elastic gearbox. And then the other side of the spring is attached to the intake pivot gearbox. So then when the series elastic gearbox is actually pivoting, the spring is oscillating, and then we're able to use a series of sensors and code to correct the angle of the series elastic gearbox based on how much force is being applied to these springs. And Sabina's going to talk about the sensors.
Yeah. That's interesting. So if we could go back real quick, just 'cause it's kind of hard to explain the series elastic without seeing it. So if you look at the far end of the spring, you have, or I guess this end of the spring, there's this black here that's actually a 3D printed part, and right under it is a belt that's inverted or flipped, and there's a pinion that's attached to it, so that way we're using that pinion drives a little shaft here, and we have a magnetic encoder up there, so that way we can detect the deflection of which the spring is moving, and then from there we use the oscillation and we compensate so that the intake doesn't constantly swivel all the time. Okay. So again, for sensors, we have the magnetic encoders for that. We run absolute encoders on the joint, on the intake pivot gearbox, as well as potentiometers on that. We have beam brakes. We have one in the back to make sure that the box is fully settled into the base of the robot. We have two, one on each side of the intake. If you take a look later, it's set at an angle so you can see whether or not the box is in a diamond shape. We notice that sometimes, every once in a while, you'll get stuck in a loop where it'll try and push out the box to get it from diamond to just a normal shape, and it'll just keep rotating. So we found out if we put sensors there, there's a possibility we can use some code to compensate for that. And we also have LiDAR, so that way we can slowly close the intakes in to make sure they're all the way closed for our purposes.
Okay, lift. Cool. This one's interesting. So we wanted to be able to lift another robot. So there's, at the beginning of the build season, there was kind of a couple ways you could go around this. You can either have both robots hang onto the bar. You can have a mechanism that another robot hangs off of on your robot, or you could do what we call a buddy climb. So the both robots go up together. So we actually did two versions of this. The one up in the corner is the one that we had for SF and SVR until we used this revision for champs. So I'll talk about both of them. The top one is, it has the principle of like telescoping tubes. So the link that's closest to the back of the robot is that one's attached to the robot. And then those are stowed flat across the entire robot, and then it latches in the front, near the front of the robot. So that's a good image. So then it has the principle of telescoping tubes without the tubes being inside the other tubes. So with telescoping tubes, you have kind of like a telescope, one set of tubes inside another set of tubes. But then with this one, we have the tube that comes out is next to the one that's originally attached to the robot. And then we call these bulbering claws because they shoot out. Yeah. And then there's constant, there's a constant force spring that's attached to the end of the second link and the front of the first link, and then this causes it to shoot out. So constant force springs, it's like a roll of metal, and then it stretches and closes, and there's a constant force being put across it. If that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so we kind of ran across a couple issues with this one. The main issue was that it was really hard to drive on tube. I think the tube was probably too tall, and robots were always falling off the back. So the back left corner right there, we had a lot of robots fall off. We had a lot of robots sag so that the climb wouldn't count. So then after SVR and before champs, we decided we wanted to change it. So this is our V2. You can tell that automatically it's a lot shorter. It's actually 3/4 inch solid aluminum tube that we I-beamed on our mill. So it has little pockets right here that we cut on our mill. And then it has 3 segments that kind of fan out. So this kind of compensates for the back side of the robot that would always be sagging or that would always fall off. And then it would kind of hold that one up a little bit. With this one, it has the same principle where it's flattened across the front of the robot, so it latches in the front. But then the difference is that if you kind of like 3 segments that fold out, there's the robot segment, and then there's this section, and then these flip out as well. So the back of this is actually attached with surgical tubing to the side of this link right here, and then this allows it to flip out when the whole lift is deployed. I call it kind of looks like if you unfolded a burrito, it would first one section would come out, and then the next one would come out. That makes sense. And actually, we assembled this I think it was the weekend before we left for champs. And then we did a force test on it, and it only sustained 40 pounds on one link, which was not good enough because robots are 120 pounds. So it bent in half, and we actually had to add more material to this top link right here so that it was able to sustain a robot that is 120 pounds. Except it's still kind of sagged a little bit. Yeah. And right here, that's the latch that held it down. So this is attached to the front of the robot. And then the latch right there holds down a standoff that's attached to the lift. And then there's a system of pneumatics that release the latch, and then the lift is allowed to come out and unfold. Any questions? Okay, so at this point, I think we're going to have you guys all come up and look at the robot, ask questions.
It's a lot cooler than we made it out to be.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool components. You can ask questions about any part of it, so yeah, here's one.